The Facebook ads learning phase is something that Facebook advertisers have feared and tried their absolute best to avoid for years. Well, that just got a lot easier because Meta is now providing us with a very useful piece of information. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So Meta is now telling us how much we can increase the budget of a campaign or ad set by without it re-entering the learning phase. Now, Facebook advertisers have been trying to avoid re-entering the learning phase when they scale for years. They've been trying to guess how much can we increase the budget by without re-entering the learning phase. Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it a different amount? Is it over a certain time period? Well, Facebook's obviously aware of this and they've just said, here you go, here's the information. We're going to tell you exactly how much you can scale by without triggering the learning phase again. Now, that's really useful information. It also completely makes sense from Meta's standpoint because if they tell us how much we can scale, and as you'll see in a second, we can scale by more than we originally thought we would be able to, it allows advertisers to scale more quickly. It allows us to scale easier. That's obviously good for advertisers. It's also good for Meta as a business because if we scale, we spend more, they make more money, etc. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like. So let's get into what this means and how this might adjust your behavior as a Facebook advertiser when it comes to scaling and setting budgets and things like that, because I think there are some very interesting knock-on effects from this, okay? So before I do that, first thing I need to say here is that if we just cancel this for this campaign, and this obviously applies to ad set level as well, you won't see this available for every campaign, every ad set. So if I go ahead and click on to this one, for example, there is no prompt, no message letting me know how much I can scale by. So any ad set or campaign that is in the learning phase still, or in learning limited, you're not going to see this on. It's also not available on some other campaigns and ad sets where we feel like it should be and we can't really work out why it isn't, just to let you know that sometimes it's not going to be. This campaign, for example, is also active, also high performing. It's not within the learning phase, it's not learning limited. And also this feature is still in rollout. Some ad accounts just simply don't have it at all. So with those caveats in mind, just to let you know in case you come in and check and go, hang on, I can't see it. Why is it available on some campaigns, not other campaigns, all that sort of stuff. Just to let you know that currently that's a thing. I imagine this will be rolled out to all ad accounts at some point, and that it will be more and more available across different ad sets and campaigns as long as you've spent a bit of money and Meta is able to calculate what the percentage increase is going to be within that campaign or ad set budget-wise without re-entering the learning phase. So that's one thing I need to quickly mention. Now, the next thing that you probably notice if I click back into this campaign here is that the increase is much larger than you may have heard a lot of people recommend. An increase from $195 to $349 is roughly a 75% increase, okay? That's much larger than the 10%, 20% that people have often talked about. And I've actually talked about this for years because this is what we've seen within the ad accounts that we run for our clients, is that you can increase by much larger increments, but just don't do it as often, especially when you are at lower budget levels. So this campaign is $195, it's not a huge budget. We can increase a good 75% here or so without running into problems. That would not be the case if we were spending, say, 10 times as much. If we were spending almost $2,000 a day, we wouldn't be able to increase that to $3,500 a day. And you would see that number change, and we can see that across the various ad accounts that do have this feature. And that makes complete sense, right? Because Meta's really good at working out who within your target audience are your best possible prospects. So they start by advertising to them. As you spend more, yes, you're still advertising to your best prospects, but perhaps the next sort of tranche of prospects aren't quite as hyper responsive, aren't quite as into what you're advertising. So the results from advertising to those people aren't quite as good. And then you sort of go on and on and on as you move out in like concentric circles to people that are not that interested, and you have to do a lot of work as an advertiser to get them interested in your product and service and get them to take action. That's kind of how it works. That's a side effect of Meta's machine learning process, their algorithm, and how good they are at identifying your best possible prospects. So you can't scale in as larger increments when you're spending more. There's no fixed percentage, and this has confirmed our point on that, what we know for years. It also means, as you can see here, that you can scale in larger increments than the 10% that's usually recommended without re-entering the learning phase. Here, 75%. You could be able to scale by 50%. You will see the number where that's available. And even if you don't see it in particular ad sets or campaigns, and you see that in this one we can increase by 75%, there's a good chance that if we were to pop out of here and jump into this campaign, that if we were to increase this by 25, 30%, that's not going to re-enter the learning phase, is it? Because if the other one can increase by that larger number we're going to have something probably similar with our other ad sets and campaigns, even if Meta's not actually displaying the number. So another thing to keep in mind. Very quickly, I've got some really exciting news. I've launched a new mentorship program to help you explode your business's revenue and profits through paid ads and marketing. Now, in this mentorship program, myself and my team will mentor you daily, literally every single working day, and because of that, spots are very limited. So if you're interested, you can click on a link in the video description below and book a call with one of my team members who can explain everything about the mentorship program and how it works. I'm really, really excited about this, and I hope to be working with you and mentoring you very soon. Okay, so given this information, how does that affect how we should scale as Facebook and Instagram advertisers? Well, I think that if you're scaling manually, I'll talk more about an alternative option to scaling in a minute, but if you are scaling manually, it makes sense to make sure that you scale within the increment that Meta's telling you. So for example, with that campaign going from $195, we wouldn't want to go to $400. That would certainly re-trigger the learning phase. Meta have let us know that information. Why would we do that? It's best to avoid the learning phase if you can, although I do think that a lot of Meta advertisers are overly fearful of the learning phase. It's not the end of the world. We have plenty of client accounts that campaigns and ad sets that are performing well in the learning phase, in learning limited. Depending on the business, sometimes it's just not possible to operate at conversion volumes that gets you out of the learning phase. If you're going after, very small number of leads, for example, but they're incredibly valuable each one, you're unlikely to hit the 50 conversions a week or so that's typically needed to get out of the learning phase. So it's not the end of the world, and if you need to make adjustments to your ads, to your ad sets, and that's going to re-trigger a learning phase, that's absolutely fine. But if we can avoid it easily, and Meta is showing us exactly how we can, then just make sure that you do increase that budget beneath the number that Meta says is the maximum to re-trigger the learning phase. I also think that once you make that increase, you want to give that campaign a good bit of time. My historical recommendation has been about 7 days, and what we're seeing is that once we've made that adjustment, Meta won't provide us with a new number that we can scale to in those campaigns and ad sets sort of from the next point. So let's say in this example here, we've got $195. If we go to 349, well, Meta's not going to tell us immediately as soon as we make that change, oh, you can also go to 700 and not re-trigger the learning phase. No, it's going to need a bit of time to recalculate. That is what we're seeing at the moment. That might change, and that might vary between ad accounts because there's a new feature and those things often happen, but you're going to want to give it a bit of time. I think a good benchmark is about 7 days, see how your performance is, and then you can look to potentially scale again, and hopefully Meta gives us that number again based on the new budget level and where we can now scale to. Now, just because we're going to be scaling and not triggering the learning phase, not re-entering the learning phase, that doesn't mean that our cost per conversion isn't going to increase or our ROAS isn't going to decrease. As you scale, the vast majority of the time, you are going to see usually a relatively slight but noticeable drop off in performance when you compare a cost per conversion or a return on ad spend metric. And that's simply because of what I already talked about, right? Meta, when you're spending smaller budgets, is going after those hyper responsive, those best possible prospects. The more money you spend, the more people they're advertising to. They start with the best possible prospects, and they have to sort of expand out to people that are perhaps not quite as good, not quite as keen in terms of being interested in your products or services and ready to buy. Okay, so that's fairly inevitable. That's not going to not happen just because we aren't re-entering the learning phase, and something that you need to be aware of. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't scale, of course, because by scaling, yes, you might have a slightly worse return on ad spend, or you might pay a little bit more per purchase or per lead, but you're likely to generate many more purchases, many more leads, and that might be better overall for your business. It often is, and that's often why we're working hard to scale client campaigns to acquire more customers, reactivate customers, and do all that sort of good stuff. But what we should see with this, making sure that we scale without re-entering the learning phase, is that we don't get that crazy fluctuation the first couple of days after the budget has been increased that we used to get. If you increase your budget by too much and you go into the learning phase, those first couple of days after you've increased that budget, the results are all over the place. Meta's sort of relearning, and we used to sort of discount those 2 days in terms of assessing how our campaign performs at the high budget level and give it 48 hours and then assess from that point to see how it performs at the high budget level. I don't think that's going to be necessary going forward. That is, of course, if you ensure that you don't go over that number and re-enter the learning phase. So I think we're going to see more stability whilst we're scaling, which is good. So using this information to scale is certainly helpful, but there is a new Facebook ad scaling method that we are using more and more, and that doesn't take you anywhere near the learning phase. I demonstrate exactly how it works in this video here. And if you want to scale your Facebook ads and your Instagram ads and you don't want to wreck your results, I strongly recommend you take a few minutes and check this out.